It's Mary Burns from Harrison's Hope, and I am beyond excited to introduce a professional that I have learned a great deal from, Barb Clark. Let me tell you a little bit about Barb. Barb has had many years of training and speaking and coaching in the world of adoption and foster care and fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. I'm excited to say that I have experienced her training and her coaching. Claire, if you could just turn your video off, that'd be great. Thank you. Um, I can also proudly share with you that in not only in the coaching side of things, but Barb has also done a great deal of training development and program development over the years, and has very recently done two exciting things. She is now the newly minted CEO of FASD Mosaic. And through that, if I understand correctly, Barb, you're offering training for caregivers and professionals, coaching and consultation for families, curriculum development and resources. And then, of course, if you're not already busy enough, then advocacy and support around IEPs and services. And you're a newly published author of a fabulous yellow covered book called Raising Kids and Teens with FASD. Barb Clark, thank you for joining us. Glad you're here.
Awesome. Thanks for
Did I
having
miss
me.
anything?
No, that's funny. That's more than enough. Yep, I'm happy to be here with you guys. Let me get my screen shared and we will have some fun. Okay, here we go. Okay, well, I am going to, yes, and please do put questions. If you have comments too, if there's something
Yep.
that resonates, throw that in the chat box. And at the end, we're doing an hour and a half, right, Mary?
Yes,
Or
ma'am.
is it two? Okay.
So we have time. We have time.
Had to remember what we were doing here. All right, so with that, I'm just going to dive in. Well, I'll just say this one last thing, though. I have five young adult kids. They are 23, 24, 25, 26, and 26. My oldest daughter, Akila, is the one who is formally diagnosed with an FASD. All of my kids were prenatally exposed, though, and likely are on the spectrum. I have told the others now if they want to seek out the diagnosis that I'm happy to support them and help them do that. But I also just this past year, this past April, was diagnosed on the fetal alcohol spectrum myself. So, and again, it's such a huge spectrum, as most of us on this call know, right? My daughter was definitely impacted in a more, I don't know if you want to say severe way, but in a bigger way than me. But I have had my struggles. I don't have the huge behaviors. I got some. I got some. I gotta say that quietly, or my husband will come in here and start saying stuff. But anyway, so I got a few of the behaviors, but I definitely have some of the learning challenges, the attention, a lot of the other things that go along with the brain. So, but when I talk about, so we're just doing strategies today is what I'm kind of focusing on. And when I talk about that, I like to talk about why the traditional strategies don't work with most of our kids with FASD or adults, to be honest.
Yep.
The typical strategies we use are consequence, punishments, logic, is how almost all of us on here were parented. And it's what we usually try to use with most of our kids. It might work with our neurotypical kids or kids with different type of brains. Doesn't work great with these ones. A couple of reasons is, first of all, that can cause further trauma. When I do my full FASD training, I always tell the story of how my husband and I threw away our daughter's blankie when she was 6, trying to teach her to stop stealing. And that was actually what led to the diagnosis of an FASD for her. But that was trauma now that we have instilled in her life. We did it with the right intentions, but the wrong information, right? Many families go further than that, though. I have a family in here in the United States that it was over a year ago now. Their 14-year-old daughter wanted to shave the lines in the eyebrows that are really popular. Parents said no for some reason, and the daughter still did it. And to punish her, they held her down, shaved her eyebrows off, and wouldn't let her pencil eyebrows in as a punishment when she went to school. That is
Oh,
abuse. That I told the person, the professional that told me about that, I'm like, I would report that to Child Protective Services because that is pretty, That's abuse.
Yeah,
And so
that's
anyway,
abuse.
sometimes people will try physical, punishment too. It's just not, it's just not a good idea, right? What we talk about in the trauma world, and FASD is trauma, right? It's in utero trauma, and many of our kids have also experienced out of utero trauma. And if they are in an adoptive foster or kinship setting, that alone is trauma. Doesn't mean every person, every adoptee or individual who spends time in foster care will be having huge struggles their whole life, but we need to acknowledge that loss of that first relationship is trauma. And so we talk about felt safety in the trauma world, right? We talk about how a lot of times kids are safe. We know they're safe in our home, but their body and brains might not feel safe. And
Yes.
so you don't feel like a safe person if all you're doing is coming down on them, yelling at them, taking things, punishing them.
Yep.
You don't feel like somebody they want to connect to, right?
Yep.
Um, but also it increases anxiety. When you think about it, like when you were a kid, I don't know, Mary, if you ever did anything, got in trouble ever, but I did a little bit.
Yeah, a
And
couple times.
yeah, I remember once my parents were at work and it was during the summer and I was at home alone, it was towards the end of elementary. And I remember sitting in my closet knowing I was going to get in so much
Oh yeah.
trouble when they figured out what I had done. My anxiety was through the charts, right?
I hid in
When
an
we're,
upstairs closet. Did the
yeah,
same
yeah,
thing. Fell asleep
yeah.
there.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. When we're anxious, we don't learn well. Because
No.
you're down in your amygdala when your anxiety increases and you don't learn well. So we're sitting there spinning our wheels around the hamster wheel with these kids when we're sitting there and we're trying to punish them to teach them to stop doing something or to start doing something. And it isn't working because we're not understanding what's going on in their brain. And so sometimes people will say to me, yeah, but they need to understand consequences because they're going to face them out there in the real world. And I'm like, you're right, they are going to face consequences. But if using consequences as a strategy to teach them things doesn't work, why do we keep doing that?
Yeah.
And so, what my favorite quote I share almost every time I train is by a man named Walter Barbie. And it goes, if you've told a child a th thousand times and they still haven't learned, it's not the child who's the slow learner. And that's my husband and me. We just kept punishing and punishing and punishing for years and years and years, even though it wasn't working. But we also had professionals telling us to keep doing that. We had them
Yes.
telling us to get more strict, to punish her more, all of that kind of stuff. And so, what I talk about is when these kids or adults are facing consequences outside of our family, whether it's at school, whether it's in the justice system, whether it's in employment and relationships, if they don't have a solid relationship with us, those consequences are going to hurt them a million times harder. They're going to need us there to advocate for them in those moments. So, the philosophies that I highly recommend are more trauma responsive therapies,
Yep.
right? First and foremost, focusing on relationship, right? Relationship, connection, connection. TBRI is a really awesome kind of curriculum or philosophy that was developed in Texas by a couple of doctors, Karen Purvis and David Cross, and it stands for Trust-Based Relational Interventions. That type of philosophy, right? In TBRI, they say connection before correction,
Yeah.
and that's what we're talking about.
Yep.
Also, not shaming or blaming. We love to shame kids, and we've got to stop doing that, you guys. We've got to stop shaming these kids. It is not fair to them. Most of us grew up hearing shame-based phrases all the time, right?
Yep.
Teachers do it, parents do it, but we want to stop. We want to try as much as we can to decrease the amount of shaming. You probably are never going to get rid of it 100% because it
Nope.
slips every once in a while for me. But then I catch myself or my kids catch me because I have given all of my kids permission to bust me when I
Yep.
do that, right? Yeah. So also though, these approaches understand the neurobehavioral aspect of behaviors. It's about understanding the brain. And I don't know if anybody on here has ever read any of Dr. Mona Hook's work. She's got two books out there. One is called Beyond Behaviors, and one is Brain Body Parenting. They're not FASD specific, but they're pretty trauma competent. And she talked about in paradigms that focus solely on behaviors. When we look at a kid's behavior, the question we usually ask is, what are they trying to get out of this? Are they trying to manipulate? Are they trying to seek attention? Are they trying to gain control? We got to stop that. That is natural. That is a natural way to think, and it's also how
Yep.
the world thinks. But we are not the world, people. Where I start singing, we are not the world. Anyways, we are not the world. We are cooler than the rest of the world. We have realized those strategies don't work. Most of us have, and if you haven't, hopefully you will by the end of this. But the question we should ask when we see a child or an adolescent or an adult with FASD having a behavior or showing a symptom that things aren't going well, what we should be asking and thinking about is what is this telling us about their underlying neurophysiological process? That's what we need to assume. I have, when I'm coaching caregivers all the time, they're like, well, this is so manipulative. I'm like, it does feel like manipulation. It
Yep.
rarely is. It's going to be once in a while because they're
Yep.
kids, right? And that's, but it's not. It's not. Also, though, these approaches are not instinctive or intuitive. You have to
No.
fight your gut, right?
It's disappearing.
Oh, Lori, can
Oh,
you mute, please? Sorry about
Oh,
that.
and so you have to fight your gut, and again, you're going to mess up sometimes, but that's when you apologize.
Yep.
But really, really importantly, though, these kind of the philosophies behind the strategies we need to embrace acknowledge the developmental age, not the biological age. And so that's really crucial. So, Mary, you can mute her. Do you
Yeah,
know how to
I'm
do
looking
that?
for it right now.
Okay.
Sorry.
If you click on the participant box and
Yep.
go next to her name, that's the easiest way. Anyways, so looking at that, and I know most of you on here have probably had some decent FASD training and have seen this developmental timeline that's common for young people with FASD. At at 18, most of them have the, expressive language skills of a 20-year-old, but the comprehension and emotional maturity of a 6-year-old. Money and time concepts closer to 8, social skills 7, living skills 11. So we call this kind of a scattered profile, a developmentally scattered profile. And so, as most of us know too, we usually recommend taking the individual's age and cutting it in half. And it's probably closer to where they're functioning at least in the, especially when they're under probably 25 or even under 30. And so that's another thing where we have to adjust our expectations based on their developmental profile.
Yep.
And so that is something I have to remind myself of still pretty often, because I find myself slipping back into expecting her to act like a 26-year-old, even though she's not.
Yep.
Um,
Well, and there's
I
many
mentioned,
times, Barb, would you say that, things are going so well and the communication is so good, and it's been a long time since something happened, that we move those expectations closer to their
yes,
chronological age so that when they
yes,
do have a slip up
yes.
that we see
Yep.
as a slip up, we go, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, what's going on here? Yeah. And we assume that they've regressed, and sometimes they might have regressed, but most of the time it's just a blip.
A blip.
It's
Yeah.
a blip. And that blip might last for weeks though, right? Because we know there are all these different reasons that cause our kids to go up and down and things like that. And there might have been some huge stressor or something that's coming up that they've got anticipatory stress towards. Maybe there's a court date, maybe
Yeah.
there's a medical procedure, something like that that has them anxious and stressed. And so, yeah, that's going to happen for sure. Um, so, again, the shame thing, just being mindful of the shaming phrases that we use. Like, it is so natural for adults to say shaming thing to young people, right? Are you trying to act dumb? Think, you need to think, try harder. And even when we just say, even if you are disappointed, don't say that you are, right? Don't say that you are. It doesn't work. You're acting like a baby. 16-year-olds don't do this. I mean, there's so many things, even when they have done something they shouldn't, and when we say, why would you do that?
Yeah.
Instantly they feel stupid. instantly feel stupid, anxiety goes high, and it impacts the connection. So being mindful of those different phrases and things are really important. Um, okay, so then this is a tool and a strategy that you can use. The developmental quadrant is something we can use anytime. This is not FASD specific, but it's great with FASD. This is in my book as well, but and some of you have probably seen this, but I did this particular one is one I did at a high school with one of my families years ago. Their kid kept getting suspended for things he was doing during hallway passing time. They were asking for supervision. School said no, he doesn't do it every day, so he knows how to make better choices. All of ridiculous stuff. I'm at an IEP meeting with them and I can hear the disconnect the school is having. So I drew a line on the whiteboard horizontally and vertical, put his age of 16 in the top left, and said, let's figure out where he functions at emotionally. And the questions you ask and think about are how does he respond to something when he's really happy or excited? Is it like a neurotypical 16-year-old would? How does he respond when he's mad or frustrated or sick or injured or hurt? Is it like a neurotypical 16-year-old would? So they sat, the school staff and the two parents, and talked, and they decided he was at above 5-year-old emotionally. So then we talked socially. I asked, does he hang out with neurotypical 16-year-olds regularly? And of course he didn't. He hung out with other neurodivergent students like himself. And so then I asked his parents, in your neighborhood, at family events, is there an age group that he gravitates towards? And they said his 7 and 8-year-old cousins are his best friends. So they chose 7 as his social age. And then the cognitive age, we just looked at where he was testing at, and it was at about a 9-year-old. So
Yeah,
what I talk about is that emotional age is what we use to connect, support, and build relationship with. That's where we meet them at, is
yeah.
where they're at emotionally. Um, I was just talking with Akila, my daughter. We were Zooming earlier today with Mowgli, her boyfriend, we were talking about this. I was telling her I just did a training last night for a group there in Canada called Never Too Late. And I was giving them emotional connected relational strategies is what the focus was last night with young adults. And I was telling them how Akila and I have all of these little inside jokes that we do. She calls me Bertha and I call her Agnes. And we have all of these just little fun-loving things that we do like that all the time. And it's what we use to connect and build relationship. Now, my other young adult children who are not neurotypical, but not as neurodivergent as she is, they wouldn't want to do that, right? That wouldn't work for them. And so there's other ways that we connect and build relationship with them. So you've just got to figure out what it is that matches each individual that you're caring for. Then the social age is what we have to be mindful of around providing support and guidance around safety and peer relationships.
Yeah.
So if you look at this, Mary, how do you think this kid would do with the smartphone 24/7?
Eeh. I'd be quivering in the corner.
Yeah, probably isn't going to work. Would you want to drop him off at the mall to hang out with friends
Not a
unsupervised all
chance.
day?
No.
No, no.
Nope.
But we also have to acknowledge how much that sucks for them, right?
Yes.
It's a rite of passage for teenagers to get cell phones or kids even. They usually do it before they're teens in today's world for some reason. But it's a rite of passage to be able to go hang out with your friends without adult supervision.
Yep.
And so we, for way too many years, would shame Akila on those things. We'd be like, well, you can't handle a cell phone. You were inappropriate. You broke the rules. We would just finger point at her, even if our finger wasn't up. And that would blow up into a physical rage.
Yep.
Then, when we finally realized we were the ding dongs and we were the problem, now what I say to her is the parts of your brain that would help you to be safe on that device have not developed enough yet. You're doing so awesome. I'm seeing so much growth, but those parts of your brain aren't ready for that yet. So that doesn't mean that, she gives me a hug and we sing
No.
Kumbaya and she talks about what a great mommy I am, right? She might still cuss me out and call me a name, but it doesn't escalate into a physical rage like it used to.
Yep.
So when I was doing this with this school team, the special ed coordinator for this very large suburban high school had a total aha moment. He goes, I just thought of something. I have 8-year-old twins, and I would never let them walk the hallways of this high school unsupervised. And I said,
Exactly.
Yeah. So they did start to provide supervision for this kid. He didn't need a one-on-one all day. He just needed it in the hallway
In the hallways.
during passing time. So this can really help. Then the cognitive age is what we need to advocate with the school to make the right adjustments to the curriculum
Yeah,
so that it matches where the kid is actually functioning at, not just based on their IQ or how
yeah,
bright they appear, right? So
absolutely.
this can
This
be an
goes
easy thing to do.
miles in making it incredibly apparent where
Yeah.
each kiddo is. And you could do this every single year and it would be
Yes.
different. You could do it
Oh,
multiple
yeah.
times through the year and it would be different.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You totally can. You can do this a couple of times a year and it's different just depending on things. And that's what this is why all of you caregivers, why your brains are fried, right?
Yeah.
Because one moment you're meeting let's say you've got a 16-year-old. 1 minute you're meeting them as an 8-year-old connected way. And then 20 minutes later, they're pissed at you for talking to them like a baby. So now they're maybe more functioning like a 13-year-old. And then an hour after that, they're a toddler,
Yeah.
right? So you're like, woo, I am fried trying to figure this out, right? So, but
Well,
you
and on top of
eventually you get good.
that, Barb, I think the other challenge becomes as our kiddos get older and they start pushing back because we're doing a little better. Um,
Hmm.
how do you have the conversation with our kiddos about this difference in the developmental quadrant? How do you help an individual with FASD understand this?
Yes. Well, that's a hard one because most of these kids don't want to hear that they're not functioning at their age. You know what I mean? And so I don't know that I would necessarily say that to the individual, to the child or adolescent
Yeah,
or whatever their age is. It's more an internal thing that we who are supporting them, whether it's the school staff, whether it's
yeah.
us, whether it's therapist, whatever, it's a way of us resetting and shifting how we respond and how we approach. And so yeah, I wouldn't really say that to them because again, that would feel shaming.
It would fall into the shaming all over again. Yeah,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yep.
Thanks, Barb.
Yeah, yeah. And I see when I do this with school staff, because I train schools all the time. I train schools to use this strategy, and then I also have done it at oh my God, I don't even know how many. I feel like probably close to hundreds of IEP meetings I have done this in. And they respond pretty well most of the time. You know, there are going to be some staff who are boogers and who aren't getting it and
Course.
stuff like that. But yeah, overall it works. Um,
Amazing.
Okay. All right. We're going to take a test now, Mary. I think you've probably done this with me before on a coaching call, but are you okay with reading my story out loud in a
Absolutely.
second? All right. So
Yes.
everybody, you're gonna answer the questions. You're all muted, so I can't see you. So just play along and pretend like you're answering them. Say the answers out loud. Pronunciation does not matter. There's going to be 5 questions I'll ask after this is over. So Mary, can you read that for us, please?
Last Cerny, Fingeldaub and Pribben were in the Nerdlink treppering gloopy Kappels and Kleeming burly greeps. Suddenly, a diddy stretzel boofed into Fingeldop's tresk. Pribben glapped and glapped. Oh, Fingeldaub, he chifed. That diddy stretzel is tuning in your grip.
Nice.
God, how'd
Very
I
good.
do?
You did good. All right, I'm going to ask you the questions. You'll be the test pilot that's doing them test dummy that's doing them out loud. What are the names of the characters?
Fingeldaub and Pribben.
Yep. What happened to Fingeldob's Tresk?
Oh, a ditzy stretzel boofed into it.
Exactly. What did Pribben do?
Oh, he glapped and glapped.
Yeah. When did the story take place?
Oh, when did last Cerny.
Last Cerny. Very good. Oh my gosh, Mary, you were so smart, and I know everybody on here got that too. My final question is, what does the story mean?
I have no idea.
No idea, right? One of my families here in Florida, I live in Florida in the US, everybody didn't say that, but one of my families here calls it my gobbledygook story, right? We don't know what, so this is just a corny way for us to kind of understand um, comprehension.
Yeah.
We are able to read the story. We can answer questions based on it, but it doesn't mean we comprehend it.
No clue.
And individuals with FASD are really good. We call this masking, right? They're very skilled. They're super smart. Most of them are smart and savvy enough to know what they're supposed to say in any given moment, but it doesn't mean they comprehend it. And that leads to a lot of miscommunication challenges between them and their family, between them and the staff at school or anywhere out in the community.
Yeah.
Um, so we just really want to dig into comprehension a bit more. And I can tell you where this happens the most is in therapy. In therapy.
The dreaded
The most
therapy.
Well, most of our kids we've over therapized, right? We've had them in therapy for a bazillion years, and they know therapy speak better than we do usually, and they know what they're supposed to say to that therapist in any given moment, right? Doesn't mean they know how to actually implement that strategy or do it, but they know how to repeat it back and how to mask really well. So this happens a lot in IEP meetings, in
Yes.
intake meetings, but it also happens in day-to-day interactions at home and in the community. So dig into comprehension a little bit more, a little bit more. All right, we all know sticker charts are stupid. I'm trying to watch my language. Um, which is rare for me, as you know. Anyways, sticker charts. If you have a kid or an adolescent or an adult and sticker charts work, that's awesome. Keep using it, right? Keep using it if it works, but if it doesn't work, shove those things in the drawer or up somebody's behind. Some professional tells you to use them. I'm so sick of them.
Yeah.
There's reasons why they don't work great. Like also the reward center part of the brain is impacted by early trauma. And
Yes.
also we know most individuals with FASD have time blindness. They can tell you what time it is, what time they're supposed to start or stop something, but they don't know what 5 minutes feels like or 5 hours. Sticker chart's not going to work if you've got time blindness, right?
Yep.
They need more immediate gratification. This is a great chart that Dr. Vanessa Spiller in Australia put together. I know it's not super easy to see, but if you go to jumpstartpsychology.com, you can see it a little better. But on the left there, she's got some of these different interventions like sticker charts, timeouts, and it shows what brain domains you have to have strengths in for those strategies to be effective. And so you can see why a lot of the typical strategies might not work for our population.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's
Okay,
rather
so
glaring.
a few of the other strategies, again, reminding ourselves all the time it's a brain thing, being patient and giving grace. So the story I have shared, I feel like 1,000 times around the world is I have a friend whose mother died from Alzheimer's years ago, and she was in memory care towards the end of life. And they all took turns bringing her to church every Sunday. The whole family did. And one Sunday, it was the 21-year-old grandson brought grandma to church, and they were Catholic. And so during Mass, they went up for communion. The priest gave the wafer to grandma and said, Body of Christ. And grandma said, I don't want that fucking wrinkly wafer to a priest, right? Her grandson is super embarrassed and he's
Yep.
whispering, Grandma, it's okay. And she's like, F if it is, really loud. The priest gave her a different wafer, which was also effed up in her opinion. And she had this string of F-bomb explosion. And she's escorted out of church by some people up in the front. So my friend's telling me the story. We're laughing hysterically because you have to laugh at some of these hard moments you get to live through. And then she says to me, it reminds me of a lot of your Aquila stories. And I said, oh, yep, I've got some doozies even at church, just like that. But I started thinking about it afterwards and for the next actually several months. And I started doing a little more research even. And I realized, wow, are the similarities between any
Yep.
form of dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's, Lewy body, frontal temporal, so similar to FASD.
It is.
As my friend's mom's disease progressed, she was physically aggressive and
Yep.
attacking staff and family. Now, not everybody with Alzheimer's gets physically aggressive, but not everybody with FASD does either,
Yeah.
right?
My father had
Lying.
Alzheimer's, Barb,
Oh, did he?
and you know what? Um, by being patient and giving him grace and remembering that it was a brain thing, he would cooperate for me. He wouldn't kick me. He wouldn't punch me. He
Uh-huh.
wouldn't pinch me. When the
Yes.
staff at the hospital were saying, "Oh no, no, don't get near him. He's got his boxing mitts on because he's going to pinch you. He's going to hurt you. And
Hmm.
I just looked at dad and said, no, my dad
Yeah.
wouldn't do that. And he was fine and they
Mhm.
couldn't believe it. So
Yeah.
yes, the
Yeah. Yeah.
similarities are
It's
remarkable.
extreme.
And we
It
give,
is.
we give our loved ones with all these named um, conditions, neurological conditions, that grace, but our kiddos don't get it,
Yeah. Oh,
right?
absolutely. They don't. They don't. And, and again, the lying is common for people in memory care with Alzheimer's or
Yep.
dementia. But again, we're able to look at it and realize it's not straight up lying, it's confabulation, which is what it is when our kids do it.
Yeah.
Stealing is common in memory care for people that used to never steal.
Yeah.
Hoarding food is common in memory care for people that never had food insecurity.
Yeah.
So there's just all of these similarities, but the difference is you knew your father before he had Alzheimer's and you knew
Yep.
he never would have pinched or kicked or somebody when his brain
Yep.
was healthy, right?
Yep. Yeah. He
And
wouldn't have peed anywhere but a bathroom toilet.
yeah, yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So our kids deserve the same grace, patience, and understanding we would give somebody with any form of dementia. They didn't, like your father probably wasn't punished when he did some of these things, right? They didn't take away my friend's mom's, cell phone or screen time that night. They didn't say you have to skip the field trip this week,
Yeah.
right? But it's because they knew her brain when it was healthy and they knew she never would have done that. And our kids deserve the same grace, patience, and understanding we would give somebody in memory care.
Absolutely.
So we also
Absolutely.
we also need to change the environment, right? So we need
Yeah.
to make the changes we can at home, at school, wherever they are, to try to prevent some of the issues, whether it's locking things up. We had to get a gun safe. We've never been gun owners, but we had to lock up car keys, wallets, tons of
Yep.
different things as she was getting older. We had to decorate our house differently. I
Yeah.
couldn't have breakable because again, our daughter does have a history of the physical aggression. And if I had things that I really cared about in our common areas, they would get broken, right?
Yeah.
Also, I have extreme ADHD. I am a slob. And I started to realize we had bigger behaviors when our main common areas were more cluttered. So
Hmm.
I had to be mindful of that too. So we've got to be really mindful of the environment and making some of those changes. We don't want to ask them why they did something they did that was a silly thing to do, right, Mary? Isn't that a big mistake most of us made forever?
Oh, forever. I still catch myself.
Yes,
I still
yep,
catch myself doing it.
yep. It's still like, why would you do that? Or why did you do that? Why did you
What?
hit your sister? Why
Yeah.
did you,
Why?
I always say this, why did you poop in the front yard? I vividly remember sitting around our dining room table and my husband wanted to know why she did that. And there's the answer. And what do they say?
I don't know.
I don't know. And now we're mad, and now we're pushing,
Yep.
and now they confabulate. And now we're
Oh,
mad at them because now they're lying to us, we think, right? So the why doesn't matter. And the answer to why they did it is because they have a brain injury,
yep.
right? So then we also don't want to match fire with fire, and we got to forgive, forget, and move on. And I'm going to talk here now about the raging. So I'll dive a little deeper into that.
Yep.
Um, and my hope is that you guys don't have the kids who rage, but I know we've got 24
We
people
do.
on here. I know
Yep.
a chunk of you have the raging behaviors with your kids. I've been always curious to know, I wish they would do research on that, like what percentage or, the aggression is such a beast. It is a freaking beast to deal
I
with.
actually asked for this to be a topic when they were
Mm,
asking individuals at the end of the conference in one session, what do you think we
mhm,
should be looking at next? And I said, a longitudinal study with aging and
mhm.
how many of our loved ones actually have what degree of raging and aggression. Those are my
Yes,
top two questions that I have.
yes. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. So we were I was the parent sitting at every specialist doctor appointment, going to every training I could find. This was back before there was really webinars very much,
Yep.
but going to in-person conferences and things. And, there wasn't a ton of them back then. This is 20 years ago now I'm talking about. There was more than there was 10 years before that, right? Like we've
Yeah.
got some pioneers in the field like Diane Melvin, Jody Culp, and many others who have got more books out there and there's a lot more stuff going on, but there wasn't much back then. But at the end of whenever a professional was done with their presentation, my hand would go up immediately and I would be like, okay, that's all great, but what do we do about the raging, right? And they would often throw the sticker charts out at me. There's this one panel of experts and this one psychologist, it was mostly professionals in the room, but there was two of us who were also caregivers. And the other parent she was on the other side of the room. She beat me to the question of about the raging. And this child psychologist started basically talking about sticker charts. He was using a marble in a jar, put a marble in the jar thing.
Yep.
And then my hand flew up and I was like, a little bit of vomit comes in my throat every time you guys say sticker charts or token economy system. And it was this dead, silent, awkward moment, right? A couple of years later, well, probably 5 years later at least, and more than that even, I was doing a training with this doctor. We were going to co-facilitate, so we're working on it together. And I was like, hey, I just want to also say sorry about that one thing and hennepin he said a little bit of vomit comes up in my throat. And he was like, that was you. I was like, oh crap, I shouldn't have said it. I thought I made it rude. And I was like, now I just outed myself. And he actually thanked me and he said, I really appreciated that because I actually got home that night and it bothered me so much. I started thinking about it. And he was like, I was like, duh. Why would we suggest that when we know that they don't comprehend time and all of these things that in their brain domains that don't work? And so I was like, oh, okay, good. But anyways, what these professionals though, other than the sticker charts, the advice they would give me is figure out the triggers and avoid them, which is good advice. But the biggest trigger for our kids is not getting what they want immediately when they want it. And you cannot avoid that all the time, right?
Yeah.
Unavoidable. So then they would say to try to distract, which is also good advice because distraction will work sometimes. Key word in that sentence is sometimes. It's not going to work every time for a whole host of different reasons. And so, but the more creative and kind of silly you can get on the distractions, the better. I think I give some examples in my book.
Mhm.
But I don't know if you saw this post from one of the caregivers. So I'm the head coach in Jeff Noble's FASD Success Caregiver Kickstart and Club program. And one of the families in there who read the book the first couple of days it came out, her kid was escalating in the backyard once and she couldn't get him de-escalated. And she goes, oh, I just saw a big fox over there behind the house. And he's like, what? And now he spent like 30 minutes or something like that looking for a fox, right? There was
Most
no
peace
fox. I
she
was
got
like,
all week.
isn't that awesome? I was like, way to go. Like, those are the kind of things that you do, right? Now, that's a white lie. She didn't see a fox, but who the heck cares if you can avoid a rage? I will white
Exactly.
lie till the cows come home to avoid a rage.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
anyways, and it doesn't have to always be lies. I'm not not saying that. There's other things, right? I talk in the story about during a car rage how I stopped in the middle of the street and got out and started dancing in the street, right? To
Yep.
just like, so you just have to do these, whatever works for your particular kid. Um, but it's not going to work every time. So then
Yep.
the other advice they would say is to keep myself calm and regulated, which I got really good at. I have about a 2 hour, 2.5 hours that I can stay calm before I start to lose my temper. Most people have 10 or 15 minutes, if even that.
Yep.
Um, and then the other thing they would say is call emergency services.
Like,
And do you
that's
guys
so
have
helpful.
911? Do you have a different number in Canada? Is it
It's,
911?
it's 911.
Okay, I know over in the UK it's different. But yeah, so
Yep.
call 911 if you don't feel safe. That was really the only advice we ever got, and a lot of it wasn't and I'm not telling you guys not to call 911 if you've got a kid who's raging. You have to do what feels right for you and depends on the current moment and the safety and things like that. And we did call 911 once. We only did it once, and it actually worked out really well for us the time we did it. We had a wonderful law enforcement officer. But we also have the dynamic that our kids are Black, and that is a risk, And my
Absolutely.
youngest son, who is in the police academy, graduated in law enforcement. So I am not anti-police. It's
No.
just a risk. So what I recommend is you track these things. If I could go back and start over from the beginning or even from way earlier, now we do track stuff, but if I could have been doing it from early on, it would have made a huge difference. You can do it in a notebook or in an app on your phone. What was the date? What was the time? When did they last eat? What did they eat? What was the situation? What were they getting mad about? What distractions did you try? Did they work? What would you do differently next time? Things like that. Because some of these distractions you can recycle,
Yeah.
right? You can't do the same one every time, but you can go back to that and be like, oh, I haven't done the dancing in the street for a while. Next time we have a car rage, I'll have to try that. Or I
Yeah.
haven't done fake phone call is one that I do too.
Oh, I love
So,
it.
so tracking it can really help, and you can sometimes even see some patterns that might be happening.
Yeah.
So before we used to live so we raised our family in Minnesota. That's where I'm from, but 3.5 years ago moved to Florida because I was done with winter. And so when we lived in Minnesota, though, we did respite for teenage boys with FASD. And this one young man his name was Matthew. He says I can share his first name. And he had been with us many times. He was a senior, he was 18 years old. Now, he used to rage so much in school that he was referred to a setting for special ed school in first grade because they were having to evacuate classrooms for him. And so by seventh or eighth grade, he outgrew his raging. And he only did the verbal and a little bit of property destruction at this point, right? But if you've had a kid who physically rages, you'll take that any day
Any
if they're
day. Yep.
not attacking you anymore. So he was in the car with two of my other kids and Akila when she had a car rage. I pulled over, I found an empty parking lot, and it was a chaotic scene of about an hour of her chasing us around with the ice scraper and whipping us with the cell phone charger, all the fun stuff. And I finally got it under control and got everybody home. And I kept Matthew up late to process this.
Yep.
And he had some insights in his own past raging. And then I said, well, how did I do? And he said, you were super irritating, Barb. I was like, what? Because I thought it was so good because I stay so calm. And I said, what did I do wrong? And he said, you kept telling her to calm down, and I hate it when people tell me that. So I found this quote, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down by being told to calm down. And it's very
So
true.
true.
So true. So true. And I'm like, okay, great point, Matthew. What else? And he said, you kept repeating her name, and I hate that too. And I'm like, okay, what else? And he said he used the R word. He said I spoke to her like she was retarded. So here's how I used to handle it when she would, we've got the zones of regulation, green zone, everybody's great. Yellow zone, it's getting a little dicey. Red zone's a nightmare. So when I would see her enter the yellow zone, and sometimes people say my kid doesn't have a yellow zone. They do. It's sometimes brief and sometimes we miss it. But they always have a yellow zone, but it can be really short sometimes. But when I would see her enter the yellow or the red zone, I would go into repeat mode. I would be like, Akila, honey, Akila, Akila, honey, calm down. Akila, Akila, this is no big deal. We can fix this. Honey, honey, calm down. I go into repeat mode and I'd be like, and I thought I was modeling co-regulation. So if y'all have the little kids, that's probably okay with the smaller kids.
Yep.
But by the time they're a pre-adolescent or beyond, that is going to be condescending, right?
Yep.
So if my husband was here right next to me and we were in an argument, and if he told me to calm down, he should probably run because I'm going to be pissed off, right? Also, if he says my name, that does not feel good. You don't say somebody's name when you have their attention unless you're saying a condescending point,
Yep.
right?
Absolutely.
So that would irritate me if he kept repeating my name over and over. And if he was speaking slowly, I would be really irritated, right? So I have this whole long list now of the things I recommend not saying or doing when our kids are starting to get a little bit escalated, right? We don't want to tell them to calm down. We don't want to repeat the name. We don't want to slow down our speech. Again, also there's always an exception. You might have a kid where you need to tell them to calm down and that works for them or whatever it is. So there's outliers always. So
Yep.
just know you know your kid best. These are just guiding theories, right? Also, though, this is not the moment to respond to cursing or threats. And again, I hate the fact that I know a good chunk of you on here are being graphically threatened in detail of how they might hurt you. I can't, like the graphic details of how I was going to be killed or injured have been extreme over the years, right? But what we have to remember in these moments are the kids, when they're in the yellow or the red zone, they're down in their primitive brain, in the amygdala, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn part of the brain. It is not where you learn. So when we say to them, you cannot speak to me like this, you need to show me respect. I'm going to call the mobile crisis unit, whatever it is, doesn't work and it only escalates them further. The other thing you can't do in these moments are point out consequences, right? When they're down in that amygdala and we say to them, if hopefully you guys are going to stop giving consequences all the time. That's my hope if you haven't already. But sometimes when I was first using these strategies, I would point out to her a natural consequence, right? Because I thought that was okay. The kids aren't going to want to play with you if they see you hitting your friend or your sibling or something, right? That is perceived as a threat. When we point out a
Yeah.
consequence that we are giving or that is natural, it is perceived as a threat when you are in your amygdala. And
Yeah.
all it does is shoot them to the top of the red zone.
Yeah.
So don't do it. Also, don't touch them.
No.
These are not the moments to try to tap their shoulder or put your hand. Now, again, you might have the outlier that needs a hand on the shoulder in the moment or something like that, or a hug. Most of the time, when they are down in that amygdala, touching them is not a good idea. Um, it
So
will
what
send
do
them
we
right.
do?
Well, I'm going to get there. I'm not done with my list of what not to
Yep.
do yet. It's a long one. Don't tell them what they're upset about. No big deal. We used to do that all the time. I'd be like, "Oh, Akila, this is no big deal. We can fix this," or something. Well, even if it's because you're out of your favorite, we're out of their favorite cereal or whatever the reason is, right? It
Yep.
feels like a mountain to them. And
Yep.
so saying it's easy to fix or no big deal doesn't feel good to them in the moment.
No.
Um, Terms of endearment you want to be mindful of. Probably good for the smaller kids, but I think about that when I'm in an argument with my husband and he calls me sweetie. I'm like, I am not your sweetie right now. It doesn't feel good, right? So again, but you might have the kid that needs those terms of endearment. We also have to be mindful of eye contact because eye contact can be intimidating or dismissive. And there are cultural differences between eye contact, in particular with the Native American community, and Asian cultures also. So we want to be mindful of we don't want to have eye contact that feels intimidating to them, which can keep them escalated. Or if we just get on our phone or computer or wash dishes, that feels dismissive. So be mindful of those things as well. And then don't use logic, right? This is what we do. We sit and I used to do this all the time where it's 3 a.m. and she's raging because she wants me to bring her to the store to buy a Barbie doll. And I'm like, the store isn't open, right? Or whatever it is. That doesn't even matter. All that. So what we have to remember in these moments is that these kids, they have auditory processing deficits, most of them. And so they can't even process all of the words we are throwing at them, right? Because we are talking so much. And so when we're sitting there explaining things to them logically, all it is doing is keeping their brains on fire because we're talking too much. So stop talking, shut the blank up, just stop, right? And that's hard because intuitively, as a caregiver, or even if we've got professionals on here, we want to help them, right? We want to help our kids when they're frustrated or upset or dysregulated. But we're not, if you've experienced this, talking them out of a rage once they've hit a certain point is next to impossible. So it's really about waiting it out. Once they've tipped into the red zone, the yellow zone is where a distraction might work sometimes, but not always. Red zone distractions don't work. Once you've tipped into the red zone, it's all done. Just shut the blank up and wait it out. And so my list of what you do is much shorter. First of all, if we've got other kids, we want to remove them. We always had a code word with our other kids that meant go to your rooms, or we had eventually a safety plan with neighbors' houses that they could go to. If we said it was usually bagel or pineapple, it kept changing all the time. But if mom or dad said that, that meant go to your room or go to the neighbors, because it's going to get a little dicey here for a bit. This is where we want to listen. We want to affirm that we are listening and hearing them, even if what they are complaining about, because I know y'all have experienced this. They might be complaining about the most ridiculous things, right? Maybe it's the fact that you can't give them a cell phone, but so what we used to sit and do in these moments was explain to her the logical reasons why we couldn't give her a cell phone. And all we did was just sit and spin on that hamster wheel. So you just listen and you say something like, I know that is hard. Maybe you say that once in a while, right? For some of these young people whose questions don't cause them stress and anxiety, you can ask them a question but most of the time when they're in the first half of the red zone, you don't want to do that. The first half of the red zone, a question or anything you say really is not perceived well until they're coming down from the first half of that red zone. So again, for my daughter, I cannot ask her a question when she's in anywhere near the yellow or the red zone. And even honest to God, the green zone questions stress her out. Questions, in the disability world, in the behavior mod world, they talk a lot about how kids need choices and we need to give them, opportunities for that. Well, a lot of times with FASD, choices cause anxiety and stress. So I actually stopped giving choices in many things. I wouldn't say, do you want peanut butter or jelly or peanut butter and jelly or grilled cheese for lunch? Because she would like lose it.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, we're having grilled cheese for lunch today. Now, if she didn't want that, I would say, well, these are your other two choices, maybe, but I wouldn't initially offer a choice. And
Yeah.
then we've all experienced that. I could give her 47 choices and she's going to shoot every one of them down. So unless we just go to McDonald's, right? That's
Yep.
that's the fun. Ugh. Anyways, for the ones that you don't want to ask questions, you want to just say an affirming thing to them once they're in the second half of the red zone or the yellow zone of like, I am so sorry you're feeling like this, or I'm going to stay with you, or something like that, that is kind of listening. Now, again, you might say that and they might tell you to go F yourself and say, you don't effing care. And that is just your clue to shut up. That means we're not to the end of the rage yet and to just stop. Do not respond. Do not bite the hook, right? And it's
Yeah.
hard. So that's my short do list. The
Our
biggest
kids
thing.
do give us opportunity to practice this though, repeatedly.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. They're really good at that. Yeah. They're really kind to us and let us practice this quite often. And eventually you get much better at it. Now, again, there are going to be times when you're not good at it, right?
Yeah.
I remember one evening I was in severe pain. It was before I had back surgery and I had had a cortisol injection in my lower back. And sometimes those cortisol injections can actually cause pain and burning for a day or two. And I was in a really bad place, and it was a longer story than I have time to go into. And I, that evening, yelled like I have never yelled before at
Yeah.
McDonald's with two young men, to her boyfriend at the time, and another young man. And I was the only white person in McDonald's at like 10:30 p.m. on a Friday night, and I lost my shit. And it was not pretty, right? So we're going to have moments where you're not doing this connected
Yeah.
relational stuff. I was able to apologize after a long elopement down the highway in the sleet. I got myself regulated. I was able to apologize to all three of them, but it's going to happen. You're going to screw up. Um,
Yeah.
what's What's important to know too, though, is for neurotypical individuals without a lot of trauma, it takes close to 2 hours to completely recover physically and emotionally from a big stressful thing. For a neurodivergent person with a trauma history or brain differences, it can take at least 24 hours or multiple days.
Yep.
So we have to be mindful of that because we're often sitting with these kids 30 minutes, 15 minutes after a rage, making them talk it through, making them apologize. Now, again, there are some outliers. Some of our kids, if we don't process it right away, might escalate again and perseverate or whatever it is. But most of them are not in a brain place to process it yet. But also, if you have somebody who consistently has some of these behaviors, I recommend not processing it every single time because all we're doing is impacting their self-esteem and our
Yeah.
relationship with them. The reason to have that conversation is if we think it's going to help them to change this behavior and response the next time. And if that isn't happening on it, then don't do it every single time. It's just not worth the energy.
No. No.
Also, what you can do though is a few days later, when you maybe find them in a good brain place, if this is a time when you feel like you should talk about it, say, hey, on Sunday when you were upset about, fill in the blank, what could we have done differently to help you? Was there anything that we did that triggered you or bothered you? Some of these kids will have insight and some won't. Akila, honestly, at 26, just in the last 1 to 2 years, is starting to develop insight in those moments. But many kids way younger have more insight in those moments. So it's worth trying. If you've got the kid that's insightful, I would do that somewhat regularly. If they're not insightful, I might do it every couple of months just to see if they're developing some of those skills or not.
Yeah.
All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about the lying. Most of y'all have heard of this word confabulation, and that's what it is the majority of the time with FASD. Now, obviously, sometimes it is going to be a lie, but
Yeah.
most of the time it's confabulation. My daughter's most famous confab was when she had stolen one of a bazillion cell phones that she stole over her life. And this is back when we were still punitive ding dong parents, right? And so we were mad, and I'm trying to figure out whose cell phone it is. And she's telling me it's Justin Bieber's and that he gave it to her, right? Because, celebrities give their cell phones away all the time. That's very realistic. Not to mention that he wasn't in Minnesota at the time where we were living. She said he performed at an assembly at the school. And so I'm trying to prove to her that she's lying because that's typical parenting, right? When a kid
Yeah.
lies, we got to catch them in the lie to prove to them they lied, and then we punish them for it. That's typical parenting. The more I pushed, the bigger and wackier the story became. She said he was at their school. He sang 40 some songs, more than you sing in a concert, right? He changed his outfit 4 times. Selena Gomez was there. It just kept getting ridiculously big. I got on my laptop, pulled up his touring schedule, and he had a concert in Brazil that evening. So I think it's my I win this power struggle moment. And she goes, Mom, it was first hour. He could have gotten on a plane to Brazil in time. So she was right. He actually
Oh,
could have
yeah.
gotten there in time. How the frick did she know that, right? Like she can't remember what 2 times 2 is, but she figured that out. So, anyways, I couldn't get her to admit that it was a lie because it was confabulation. She was confabulating. That's when our brains fill in the gaps of our memory and understanding with wrong information. All of our brains do it. If y'all have a significant other or have had one, have you had those moments where you're like, I told you this, and they say, no, you didn't, and you say, yes, I did, and they say, no, you didn't, and you go back and forth on that? That's how we, most healthier brains confabulate. To be honest, most of the time in those moments, it's the person who thinks they told the other person something because what happened is you practiced it in your head and your brain remembers you did it. That's what
Yeah.
happens to me all the time. And so, but individuals with FASD will confabulate like that, but they will also do these big, goofy stories like it's Justin Bieber's cell phone, right? And so the most common times they are going to confabulate is when they have a tiny ounce to a ton of anxiety. So that's first and foremost when they're in trouble, right? When they know they've been caught in the act or something like that, brain goes on fire and they can't remember the fact and they start to confabulate. When they're trying to socially fit in somewhere, also is a really common time. And then when they can't remember or understand something they think they should. And so what I recommend doing is what we started doing years ago was we taught Akila the word confabulation. And we say, because of your brain injury or however you want to say it, whatever is the language you use with your kid, sometimes your brain does this thing called confabulation where it's trying to confuse you or trick you. Hey, mom's brain does the same thing sometimes, right? But you need to we're going to let you know when that's happening because otherwise people think you're lying and they don't like to be around you, right? We train her school staff on that. We trained her group home staff that she lives in now on that. And we all respond in this way, and it works so well for her. It works so much better. She now has stopped herself several different times in the last many years and will stop and be like, Mom, is my brain doing the big word? Because she usually doesn't remember the word. And I'm like, it is rock star, way to go.
Yeah.
Right. So that's why it's so important that we can try to teach our kids about some of these things about their brains. Now, some of our kids also have this is a whole nother training, have something called anosognosia, where they actually it's a deficit of self-awareness and it looks like they're just in denial and it isn't denial. It's very common with Alzheimer's, schizophrenia, bipolar, and FASD. And so again, it looks like they're just denying, but it's tied to lesions in the front right lobe of the brain. It's
Mm.
fascinating. That's a whole other training too. But but that's why so that's why in that situation, that's why you say, you know what, my brain does the same thing. Your brain might do it more often, but we both do it. And so we're gonna let each other know when that's happening. You'll have to tell me when you see it, and I'll tell you when I see it, right? It works so much better, so much better. And just briefly too, again, if we have confabulators, we are at risk for false allegations. And so if we have a confabulator, I just recommend documenting those in all settings. If it's something stuff they're saying at school, at a faith-based organization, in the community events, in the neighborhood, at families, in the home, document it so that if you are dealing with an allegation, first of all, don't be mad at the system or the investigator. This is how we keep kids safe, right?
Yeah.
This is how we keep kids safe. And don't be mad at the kid either. Even if it feels personal, it is not personal. It is not personal. And what we want to say to the kid is don't ask them if they said it because you know they did. We don't want to
Yeah.
ever set our kids up to have to lie or confabulate. So, what I said to her the first time, we only had two, and the second one was a different kind. But what I said to her is, hey, does this stuff actually happen in our family? And she said, no. And I said, I'm really relieved. I didn't think so. But here's the problem, honey, is if people think that we do that, they're never going to let their kids come to our house for a play date or a birthday party. And they're probably not going to invite you either. And she was like, what?
Right.
And I was
Yeah.
like, I would never let you go to somebody's house if I thought their parents did things like that. And she was stunned at that revelation, right? And so if we say to them, you could have gotten us into a lot of trouble, or they could have
Guilt,
pulled
blame,
you
and
and put
shame.
you in foster care. Now we've given them an idea what to do when they're ticked off,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So don't do that. Okay, stealing is kind of the last huge behavior that I'll be covering here. Again, as I mentioned, Akila, well, I didn't say this because I didn't do the main FASD training, but we figured out she had FASD because of the stealing, right?
Yeah.
And so when we finally realized we were the problem and we needed to do things completely differently, we sat down and said, honey, we're starting to understand that the stealing is a part of your brain injury. We're not going to be mad at you or disappointed, and we're not going to punish you if you steal, at home at least. But we're going to talk about it every time because we want to help you to learn not to steal because it can get you into a lot of trouble. And so one of the next times she had stolen, it was a cell phone again, dozens of cell phones she had stolen. And I brought it to her and I said, honey, who do I need to get this back to? And she said, oh, that's Dr. So-and-so's. And I was like, our school superintendent, and this is my true story. And she said, yes. So I said, well, where was it when you took it? And she goes, I go into the district offices every day at lunch to talk to the secretaries because she's super sweet and social when she's not ticked off.
Yep.
And so she, and I knew she went in there each day. And so I said, well, when you saw that phone sitting on his desk, how did you feel when you first saw it? And she goes, oh, Mom, I got so excited. I just got really excited. And I said, okay, what happened next? And she goes, I grabbed it. And I said, well, how did it feel when you were first holding it? And she said, oh, it felt so good because, Mom, I've wanted a phone my whole life, right? And I was like, I freaking know that. Yep. And then I said, well, how do you think he felt? How do you think the secretaries felt? Do you think whoever left the door unlocked got in trouble? Things like that. But you can't make this a 30-minute conversation because they have very short attention spans, right? So I said, well, how do you feel now about having taken it? And she said, not good. And I said, why? And she said, well, because that wasn't my phone and that was stealing. And what we had been trying to teach her for years, we were working with an outside therapist, and we had been trying to teach her this at home, at school, everywhere, that if you feel the urge to take something, the impulse to take something that isn't yours, tell the closest adult. And I had gone to everybody in that school, lunchroom staff, custodians, secretaries, teach. Everybody knew if Akila says this to you, you say, thank you for telling me. Let's go to the office. I'm so proud of you and find somebody to help you process this. And so So, you know, I said, so what should you have done when you felt that impulse to take it? And she said, I was supposed to tell the closest adult. And I said, why didn't you? And she looks at me like I'm a ding dong. And she goes, I told you there weren't any there. Now, that's the concrete brain of a kid who can't solve problems, who don't have those higher, you know, executive functioning skills of solving problems and are very concrete thinkers.
Yeah.
So now this was not the last time that she ever stole, right?
No.
But it probably took a year and a half of that approach and she stopped stealing. Now I'm not going to say that's going to happen for your kids, but it eventually will. It might take a couple of years, it might take a couple of months, who knows, right? Every kid and the way their brain was impacted is different. But so all of those questions we asked, we had been asking her for years, right? And most of her answers always were, I don't know, I don't know, I don't want to talk about it, I don't want to talk about it. But that was because we were about to punish her and she knew she was in trouble and that we were mad at her. So when we moved to the connected relational approaches, it reduced her anxiety. And
Yeah.
when anxiety is reduced, learning happens more readily, right? And so it allowed for the open conversation and all of that stuff. So it really does work. You know, I didn't say this either with the raging. We realized when we shifted to these different approaches with the raging, her raging decreased exponentially, right? It didn't go away initially, but it decreased big time. And we real now, and then we feel like crap as caregivers, realizing we were causing a lot of the rages. We were causing her to go higher into the red zone and to stay there longer. Not what any of us want to do. You got to forgive yourself. You didn't know what you didn't know when you didn't know it, right?
Yeah.
Can't do anything about that. So, you know, it's extreme and intense. So, all right, I got a few more minutes here, so we have time for questions. Let's see. All right, so I have this BEARS acronym. It's in my book too. Once y'all get the book and read it, I'm sure. I know not everybody's into reading books though. So what I recommend when you're starting to feel a little frustrated with your kiddo is to use this BEARS acronym. And this is not something you say out loud. This is inside your head. This is an in your head thing, right? So the first thing that you do is you shift and you adjust this from a brain-based perspective. You think brain, 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 brain. And then the second thing that you're going to do is you're going to try to do a really quick assessment of what you think their emotional age is in this hot minute, right? And again, the majority of the time when they are starting to have a behavior or when things are getting wonky, they are probably a toddler or a preschooler emotionally in the moment.
Yeah.
Um, can you also do a quick assessment of what has their anxiety all increased, right? We always are looking up here at how do I stop this undesirable behavior instead of digging deeper at what has them up here,
Yeah.
what got them all jacked up. So we want to figure that out. And then the R stands for relationship. I know that's shocking. Relationship, relationship, relationship. So we want to have an intervention that is relationship focused whenever possible and has a sensory intervention to it.
Yeah.
So this can work so much better. I'll give you a quick example here and then we'll take some questions. This is one that didn't go well in a minute, so I'm going to tell you what went wrong and what I recommended they did differently. So this was actually my daughter's the first group home that she lived in. In the summer, once she woke up in the morning, it was super hot and went straight to the thermostat because she's thermostat obsessed because of her sensory processing issues. And so it was set at a higher temperature than normal. And she got mad instantly. And the staff person, unfortunately, went logical with her. Oh, well, we had to turn it up overnight because the girls whose bedrooms are in the basement, it was getting too cold down there, and started explaining the scientific differences between heating and cooling between a basement and an upper level of a home. Before you know it, Akila's in a full-blown rage, grabs a frying pan, attacks the staff, injures the staff. Police are called, ambulance is called, and she spends over 10 hours in the emergency room. So the manager called, told me the story, and I said, "Well, how did you coach that staff on how they could have handled that differently?" And they said, he said, I don't know what you mean. And I was like, oh, okay, we got a problem here, right? But I'm like, here's what I would have done if I was sitting there. I would have said, oh my gosh, Akila, I have been sweating all morning. I didn't even think to look at the thermostat. Thank you. I wonder how it got that high. It might be broken. Let's put it down to 66 degrees. If it doesn't cool, oh, and I don't know what that would be in Canadian
Close
temperatures. I
enough.
suck. Yeah, let's cool it off, is what I'm saying. We'll decrease it so that it cools off in here. And and in the meantime, and maybe we'll have to call the maintenance people over here. It might be broken, but you must be miserable, darling. How can I help you? Do you want to take a cold shower? Do you want something cold to drink? Do you want an ice pack? How can I help you? Right? We would not have. So I just looked this up on ChatGPT. That day was probably seven to $10,000 in taxpayers' money wasted, right?
Ouch.
Every time you call the police and new layers of trauma, more importantly,
Yeah.
new trauma for her and the staff.
Yeah.
So this different kind of, I jokingly call this, some people don't like this, I love it, wussy parenting. Not because I'm a wuss, it's because the world judges me to be too lenient and wussy with her, right? And I say this all the time. If you're not hearing judgment from your friends, family, and professionals, you're not parenting these kids the way you should. Embrace that frickin' judgment. Come to a support group with other caregivers like us, and we will laugh at their moronic advice, right? So embrace that advice. It means you're doing it right.
Yeah.
It means you're doing it right. So I've got my book. There's the QR code for my book. I can take some questions now for the last
Awesome.
15 minutes or so. I
Awesome.
also want to just show this too. I've got a few
Yes.
other books listed, and I don't know, Mary, have you read Rossi's book, Life in the
Oh,
FASD Lane?
I have read every single one of these.
Yeah,
Rossi's is
I
one of my
figured you had.
favorites.
Yep. Rossi's
Yeah.
book is a good one, and it might be a good one even for some of our teens or young adults to read.
I was,
I was just talking with his mom, Jan. Well, we were texting this weekend. His mother, Jan, Rossi lives over in the UK, and his mother and another caregiver, Joe Garofalo, are writing a book right now. We have the same publisher on FASD and school, which is
I
awesome.
can't wait.
I know, but Jan was saying she's so sad that this book isn't available on audiobook and
Mm,
they don't put all books on audiobook and I'm sure it's all because of financials. My book
yeah.
will be available in February on audio, but the trick there that I keep telling people is you buy it on Kindle and then you have your Alexa. If you have you get one of those devices, or you can even just get the app on your phone, the
Yes.
Alexa app. I'm trying not to activate mine,
Yep.
but and
I
so
don't
and then
have
you
one, so
have
you can use Alexa.
yeah, you can use her and you just enable the Kindle app on it and it will read it to you. So I can I'll take a walk and I'll have the Alexa app on my phone reading it to me or when I'm driving in the car or sometimes if I'm cleaning I'll have the thing in my house reading it. So that's some of our kids do better with audio, but
Yeah.
that's a way to do it. So anyways, do we have any
These are
questions, Mary?
great resources, Barb, and thank you for putting up the QR code. What I'm going
Mhm.
to share with the group is one of the things I love most about Barb's book is the fact that it's an easy to read book, right? You can pick it up, read a chapter and go, "Oh my God." And then you can put it
Mhm.
down and you can pick it up another day and go, "Oh, I got to go back to this again." It's brilliant. It's beautifully
Mhm.
written. It's in language that you can understand, and it is truly appreciated. So
Yeah,
we got some interesting questions, Barb.
I
Um,
figured.
how do teachers respond when you walk them through the quadrant? Is it generally well received?
Yeah, it really is. When I do it in IEP meetings, it's pretty well received. And when I train schools all the time, and they really like the tool. I know several schools that are using it all the time in IEP meetings for any disability and stuff like that. So overall, it really is. And especially if we also can show them that developmental timeline, the scattered profile, to give them an idea of, because that's again, this is what confused most of us before we learned about FASD is with the strong expressive language skills, we all make assumptions that they're just being making bad choices and being disobedient and things like that because of that scattered skills that they have going on. So it really helps.
It does. So interestingly, and I'm jumping quickly just to make sure we have caught most of these. Yeah, so very true. A lot of these things won't work with younger kids. That's where we can go back to using the terms
Hmm.
of endearment. but I think it's true, Barb, that
Yep.
it's relationship, connection over
Yes.
correction, no matter what
Yep.
age our
Yep.
kiddos are at. Um, so she wanted to know about Vanessa Spiller's chart with all the different pieces in it. So we've called out Jumpstart and Vanessa.
Yep.
Um,
Good.
so here's someone, Deb is saying, my girl 17 has been pacing around saying her body's feeling angry, will be sobbing and shaking. I've tried reducing stress, but it hasn't helped. She doesn't get aggressive with me, but is clearly in pain. So,
Mm-hmm.
what do we do in those moments when we don't know how to support our kid? What do you think? Now,
Yeah.
all our kiddos are different, but what do
Mm-hmm.
you think that first step should be?
Yeah, and that's a hard one, Deb. And all of our kids' profiles are also different. There's
Yeah,
similarities, but differences, obviously. So I would just remain with her and I would listen. I would see if there's calming music that helps her regulate. Like, for example, I don't
yeah,
know if you've tried this, Deb, but sometimes what we can do in a moment when you find her in a good brain place, like not in the evening when she's in these moments, right? But in those other moments, trying to sit and say, hey, last night or the other night when you were really upset and stressed out, what do you think? What do you want me to do? How can I help you in those moments? Would it be helpful to have some certain music on?
yeah,
Is it the lighting? Do you want me to kind of turn the lights more dim in the room? Like, so again, in those moments, are there any kind of sensory-based things in particular that we can do that can help? But really, for some of these kids, it's a matter of kind of waiting it out and then trying to help them get more in tune with it. And even saying to them questions like, when you were feeling like that last night, how did it feel inside of your head? How did it feel inside of your stomach? Like, again, some of them are more insightful than others, but asking some kind of concrete, specific questions. And so, like, sometimes what we can do is we can try to give them, because they don't have words in those moments usually. And
yeah,
so to give them a visual of, like, this one family I worked with, we talked about their little girl said, "Oh, I feel like there's a tornado in my tummy," when we
yeah,
were asking her these questions. And then the dad, and then we were asking about her head, and the dad was like, "Is it like a hurricane in your head?" So we kind of went with the weather theme, right? But we came up with a visual where if she put her hand on her head and her
yeah,
stomach, you can't see my stomach, that meant everybody shut up.
yeah,
I'm losing it, right? And so that was when they would kind of come in with a connected relational way. That's where they would try to meet her from a sensory perspective. Um, and things like that. So sometimes, again, for some of these kids, sometimes like, giving them a physical outlet of like, I think I just posted on a couple of the Facebook caregiver pages this week, the punching
yeah.
bag thing. I think
They're
you had
great.
said, Mary, that that's worked for your kid.
Big
But yeah,
time. Yeah.
mm-hmm,
It has
yeah,
saved drywall and doors being busted and
yeah,
punched through.
nice. Mm-hmm,
So for me, I'll buy 20 of those things if I have to, right?
right? Yeah, one in
Um,
every room.
Exactly. We've had a couple of people ask about whether recordings will be available, saying that they'd love to share it with some other people. So our feedback there, just for everyone to know, is eventually they will be available to Harrison's Hope's caregivers on our new website. However, we are also willing to walk through and talk through Barb's information and wisdom by leveraging her book, guys. We can lift and share and discuss with our partners and our family and anyone
Mhm,
else to share this knowledge. Um, Yet someone asked how do you have so much patience? From lots of practice.
mhm. Lots of practice.
Here's a great question. I'm also curious how you incorporate the student in the types of conversations. So this is when we were thinking about the
Oh,
developmental quadrant and
yeah,
how do we
yeah,
help our kiddos learn this. She
yep,
says particularly for teenagers who would sit at the table, especially
yep,
16 onwards,
yep.
when they have individual rights in school. So That's a tough one.
Yep.
That's a whole nother topic. But any
Oh,
high level
it
insight
is.
there?
Yeah, a high level, what I would say is most of the schools want the kids in there, but they don't. You can usually have a portion of it be without them. So you
Yes.
can either say, what I usually recommend is we start it without them and do half of it without them. So you can, honest to God, for these kids, those IEP meetings are freaking nightmare for them to
Awful.
sit through. It's
Yeah.
awful. And I don't like them to have to sit through the hard parts of it. And
Yeah.
so you can tell the school that you will not let them in there for those hard parts of the conversation,
Yeah.
and the school can suck it. You can fight with the school on this one, right?
Yeah.
But I usually say the first half we don't have, and that's when in the agenda, that's when we talk about these things that you don't want to talk about in front of the kid.
Yep. So I've gone with that approach and it has worked far better.
Mhm.
Harrison doesn't want to be involved in the ugly stuff, and that's what he calls it. Mom, you
Hmm.
go advocate. You deal with the
Yeah.
ugly stuff, but I'll come in and say what I feel I need to say, and then I just want to go.
Yep.
And that works.
Yep.
So why wouldn't we do that? So interesting. Someone's asked the question, do you feel Ross Green's collaborative, proactive problem solving is effective with kids with FASD?
Yes. Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Yeah, absolutely. And and again, it's going to work for some and not for others too. There's also the LEAP method, which I love, which
Yep.
is by Dr. Javier Amador, and it's listen, empathize, agree, and partner. It's similar to Ross's.
Very
So
similar.
yes. Hmm.
Yep. And we have actually got to the bottom of the question list. Although there's also lots of thank you, thank you, thank you. And we had one caregiver that was, brave enough to share that, yes, there is so much judgment out there. And I think that is probably one of the number one most exhausting things that our caregivers do
Yeah.
um,
Hmm.
for supporting and
Yeah.
advocating for our kids is overcoming that judgment.
Yep.
Um, it is so frustrating. I mean, we all
Yep.
have things like the sticker chart comment that sets us off,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
lack of understanding
Oh
when our
yeah.
kiddos
Yeah.
aggress at home,
Yeah.
but don't
Yeah.
demonstrate that at school. It is
Yep.
so frustrating.
Oh,
Any
it's so hard.
little gem there? How do we
With the
help the professionals understand, especially at school, that this is really happening physically at home
Well,
afterwards?
and that's the hard one is they need training on it,
Yeah,
right? Like we've got to talk these stinking schools into the training. And
absolutely.
I trained a charter school in a different state that in early October I did it in person. And what's great is they've now hired me to consult on a bunch of IEPs.
Yes.
And I actually, right before I did this, I just met with the two caregivers involved, and they were talking about how everything changed, just the way that the staff were responding to their kid after they received the training. And I'm like, nobody goes into education to be an asshole,
No,
right? Like they go into it
no,
because they like kids and all of those things. But they just don't know what they don't know, just like we
exactly.
didn't. Most of us tried all the typical strategies initially. So
Yeah.
so it's trying to get them open to the training, or even I'm telling you, my book, just be schmoozing on this. I only get, I hardly make anything off of it. You only get 10%. I only get 10%. So I'm not doing this to make money. I'm doing it because I think it's helpful. And
Absolutely.
it will be helpful for teachers. I've already had a
Yeah.
couple of teachers who have read it and were like, oh yeah, there's stuff we can use in there in the classroom even.
Exactly.
Um,
Barb, I like that approach because the bottom line is I don't care where the general public, including teachers and every other professional out there that interacts with our loved ones, I don't care how or where or when you get the education and the training. Use whatever
mhm.
modem you like the best, but please, for the love of God, get it.
Yes,
Right?
exactly.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Barb,
Yep.
I
It
want to
makes a huge
thank you.
difference.
There has been so many positive comments. I knew how loved you'd be. And there are many people that came because they knew it was you tonight.
Oh,
As
that's sweet.
always, thank you for
Yeah.
bringing your game every time.
My pleasure. I love hanging out with caregivers like y'all. And I do coaching now. My business FASD Mosaic, I do individual caregiver coaching. I'm the head coach in Jeff Noble's program, but I do training all over virtually and in
Awesome.
person. So if you can talk a school into it, I'm happy to do it.
Awesome.
Um, yeah.
Barb, will the deck be available or a handout that we
Yeah,
could
I emailed
share?
it to you about 2 minutes before we started, so you're
Perfect.
welcome to share it with people.
And your contact information is on it so they can get a hold of you
Yep.
too. Fabulous.
Yes. Yes.
Barb, this was awesome. I'm so grateful, and I know our caregivers are too. And I will share to the folks that attended, I will share the handouts. That is truly appreciated. I know they were drinking it all in tonight. Oh, there you go. See, you're getting hearts.
Oh, that's sweet.
That's awesome. Everybody, thank you for joining us. I knew you'd love Barb. Come back for more. I'm happy to share some. There's big boots to fill next month, and it is the one and the only Maggie May.
Oh, Maggie, that's her boots are unfillable too. She's the
So
best.
now we'll get the lived experience perspective from Maggie.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
but
Cool.
Barb, I
Cool. And I did just drop the handouts in the chat
oh,
box. I should have done that at the beginning, but you can also email them, but
I'll
people
email
can
them out.
download it.
I've got everybody's email. But thank
Awesome.
you. This was huge. We love the book, and we can't wait for the number 2 book to come out. Keep us posted, and we can't wait to book you for a session and bring you here live to Canada because you
Mm.
could take up a whole day, no problem.
Oh yeah. Yep, I can do a couple of days.
Awesome. Barb,
Thanks, Mary.
I'm looking forward to it. Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.